What's up, sports fans? This is the NCAA College Sports Channel. It is time to give you my official game picks and predictions heading into Week 9 of the 2025 college football season. Going back to my predictions last week for Week 8, I went 7-3 overall in those picks. I got 7 out of the 10 games right and then 3 out of the 10 games wrong. So my overall record now heading into Week 9 throughout this 2025 season when making picks and predictions is now 51-29. So we've had a pretty good track record this year. We haven't gone under 500. The lowest we've gone this year is just pretty much 5-5, and I think the best that we've done is probably 8-2, and we haven't gone 9-1 or even undefeated throughout this series since I started it last year. So how about Week 9? I picked out 10 of the biggest games in my opinion. I'm going to give you score predictions, and I'll give you that official team that I think is going to win that game. So let's jump right into it here. Starting with this one, we got Ole Miss at Oklahoma. This one will be at noon Eastern time on ABC. Oklahoma is favored by 4.5 in this one. Both of these teams ranked in the top 15. They're both 6-1 on the season. You got Ole Miss coming in after a very tough loss to Georgia. They lost that game by 8. Lost focused in the fourth quarter. You got to wonder how they bounce back after that heartbreaking loss. And then for Oklahoma, they took care of business against South Carolina. I thought their defense played pretty well in that game. Offense seemed to get back on track after that, disappointing loss to Texas a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, Oklahoma looks like they're kind of back on track. This is a pretty big matchup here, top 15 matchup between two SEC teams. This is kind of a tough one for me to pick. I do like Ole Miss's offense in this game, but defensively I do like Oklahoma's defense, and I think Oklahoma will have a game plan here. They'll kind of do what Georgia did, run the football, slow the game down, and really keep that Ole Miss offense off the field, and I also think they can probably force some turnovers. So with that being said, I think Oklahoma playing at home, they improved to 7-1. They're kind of the better 6-1 team. And I also think Ole Miss probably comes in a little bit beat up, especially after playing a physical game against Georgia for all 4 quarters. So I got Oklahoma getting the win here 24-20. The final score in this one, again, score predictions don't really matter. What really matters is I'm picking the team who I think is going to win, but I'm going with a final score of 24-20 in this game. Next up, we have a Group of 5 matchup in the American Conference. We got South Florida at Memphis. This one is at noon Eastern time as well on ESPN2. South Florida is favored by 4.5, and look at the over and under. It's at 63.5, so we're kind of expecting a lot of points to be scored in this game, which honestly, it doesn't surprise me that much. South Florida has a really good offense, and look, I don't study Group of 5 teams that much, but if you watch South Florida this year, this is a really good football team. Same thing with Memphis, but how does Memphis bounce back after kind of a disappointing loss to UAB last week? I think they'll come out motivated because I feel like they were kind of overlooking UAB last week, and they were probably looking ahead to this game against a top 20 USF team. South Florida, again, a really good team, a well-coached team. Alex Ghosh, I remember him as the former offensive coordinator at Tennessee, and he's always had pretty good offenses. So I think this is a pretty even matchup here, but I think South Florida kind of has played a little bit better than Memphis all year, and I think South Florida is definitely the most consistent team in the Group of 5 this year. So I'm going to go with South Florida in this one. Close game, but I'm going to go with South Florida in this one in a shootout. 34-31, the final score in this high-scoring matchup. Next up, we have Northwestern at Nebraska. This one will be at noon Eastern time on Fox Sports 1. Nebraska's favored by 8.5. I find that to be very surprising. This is a pretty high number here to be favored for Nebraska. I think Northwestern is a sneaky football team in the Big Ten. They're not a great team, but they're like a quality team, and I think they're actually like a really good team this year, but not a great team if that makes sense. But you look at these two teams, both of them are 5-2. This kind of does decide. This game kind of decides which team probably goes on to be like maybe a dark horse in the Big Ten the rest of the year. Again, you can't really sleep on this Northwestern team if you are Nebraska. Nebraska's coming off a very terrible performance against Minnesota last week, so they definitely want to bounce back here. But I wouldn't be surprised if Nebraska goes down for the second week in a row. Nebraska's won a lot of close games this year. If you go back to their previous games, they've won a lot of close games. Northwestern, they lost to Oregon. That was like the last time I watched this team, and they weren't competitive in that game, but they've gotten better as a team as of late. So I've kind of had a hard time with this one, but I think home field advantage will be the difference. I'm going to go with Nebraska here in this one. I think they do bounce back after a loss to Minnesota, and I think Dylan Raiola has a better performance, but I think they win this one 30-27. Northwestern will keep it close, and again, I wouldn't be too surprised if the Wildcats ended up winning this one. Next up, we go to Missouri at Vanderbilt. Pretty much the game of the weekend since game day is going to be down here. This one's at 3:30 Eastern time, and surprisingly, it's not an ABC game. It's an ESPN game. Vanderbilt's favored by 2.5 in this one. This is also a pretty even matchup. It's kind of similar to the Oklahoma and Ole Miss game. Both teams coming in 6-1 with pretty much similarities. Their one loss, of course, coming to Alabama. Missouri lost to Alabama by 3. Vanderbilt, got beat by Alabama like 30-14, but Vanderbilt had to play on the road in that game, and then also Alabama, that was a big revenge game for them, so I could see why they come in fired up. But you look at Vanderbilt coming off a pretty impressive win against LSU. Diego Pavia's got to be one of the toughest quarterbacks in the country. Missouri's coming off a pretty close win against Auburn last week, so do you feel kind of comfortable going with Missouri here? I don't really think so. I feel like Missouri's probably going to lose one of their road games here down the stretch of the season because they haven't played a lot of road games, and I think this will be probably their toughest test. I know Auburn's a very tough place to play, but Vanderbilt's got a pretty good football team that's way better than Auburn, and so this was kind of a tough one for me to call. I think it's a pretty even matchup. I think home field advantage will be the difference. I'm going to go with Vanderbilt to improve to 7-1. Close game, but I got to go with the Commodores in this game. I'm going to say a 28-24 final score in this top 15 matchup. Next up, we have BYU at Iowa State. This one is at 3:30 Eastern time on Fox. Iowa State is favored by 2.5, and I kind of find that a little bit surprising that, Iowa State is favored, but, it does surprise me. It really doesn't shock me, maybe at the same time, but you look at BYU, they're coming off a big win against Utah last week. I think we kind of figured out that BYU is actually a pretty good football team, but they're heading on the road in this one. This is a very tough place to play. Iowa State is not a bad team. They just haven't been talked about, probably since the Week 0 win over Kansas State. And I think for a funny fact, maybe the last time I watched Iowa State was probably that Week 0 game, and then also the last time I think maybe I also watched him was probably against Arizona, which they did look good in that game, but they did not look good against Cincinnati. So Iowa State is a team, they also lost to Colorado. Colorado was their other loss, and I think that was the last time that we saw this Iowa State team on the field. So yeah, Iowa State definitely has a lot to prove in this game, and I think they do that. I think BYU is a team that is not overrated, but I just don't feel comfortable going with them, if that makes sense. It's the Big 12, there's a ton of parity, and I feel like we'll see probably BYU go down this weekend. So going with Iowa State here 24-21 to pull off the massive upset, even though it's not typically an upset since they're favored. But BYU is ranked number 11, so I think that could probably be considered an upset. Next up, we got Illinois at Washington, 3:30 Eastern time on the Big Ten Network. Washington also favored against a ranked team. They're favored by 4.5. You look at this Illinois team, they're coming out of a bye week, obviously, losing to Ohio State a couple weeks ago, which they were not competitive whatsoever in that game. Yeah, they had no chance in that game. Washington's coming off a pretty tough game against Michigan. You got to wonder what, Washington's status will be. Are they a little bit beat up, especially after playing a physical Michigan defense? That's honestly a very tough question to answer. Illinois had the bye week to get ready for this travel out west to Seattle. I think that kind of does affect them still, though, because, again, how many times do we see some teams travel across the West Coast? That tends to give some ranked teams some trouble, and pretty much, if you're not ranked, that tends to give you a lot of trouble. So I think this is one of those games. I think it is close. It probably does, come down to a shootout here, but I got to go with Washington. I think playing at home, that's the difference. I think it's also a pretty even matchup, and I do like Washington's quarterback. I think he'll have a much better performance compared to the Michigan Michigan game where he got pressured a lot, so I do expect him to run the football in this game, and I got to go with the Huskies here, 31-28. Next up, Minnesota at Iowa. This one is also at 3:30 Eastern Time on CBS. Iowa is favored by 8.5. I also kind of find that very surprising. And look at the over and under. It's at 38.5. So we're expecting a really, really low-scoring game in this one. You got two pretty even defensive teams. Offensively, I would probably give the advantage to Minnesota, and that's kind of the reason why I decided to go with Minnesota in this game, because I don't really know how good Iowa's offense is this year. I haven't really watched them, probably since, the Iowa State loss back in week number 2. I watched Minnesota last week. They ran the football pretty well against, Nebraska, and I think that could be the difference in this game. Both teams are probably going to want to run the football, and the defenses will dominate, but I got to go with Minnesota. I really liked how they played last weekend, and I think they got some momentum heading into the rest of the year, and I kind of trust P.J. Flett to get the job done, so I got to go with Minnesota in this low-scoring defensive battle. Again, 17-14, both defenses really dominate. Next up, we have Texas A&M at LSU, 7:30 Eastern Time on ABC. Texas A&M is favored by 2.5. This looked like it was probably going to be the game of the weekend if LSU didn't lose to Vanderbilt last week. But let's be honest, LSU has been so inconsistent on the defensive side of the football. There's no question about that. They don't have a great offense. Defense, they have a great defense. Texas A&M, though, they've been pretty consistent as a team this year. They have a win over Notre Dame, but they really technically haven't beaten anybody since that game. And they're coming off a pretty close, sneaky win against Arkansas, 45-42. And, I still don't trust LSU in this game. I really don't trust them. I get it. It's on the road. Death Valley is a tough place to play at night, and it's really hard to go against LSU at nighttime in Death Valley, but still, when I look at the matchup here, LSU just doesn't have a great offense. I mean, they can definitely have a great offensive game in this one, but I just don't really trust them. So I think Texas A&M, even on the road, I think the Aggies actually do survive in this environment. I'm going to go with Texas A&M here to get the win over LSU. On the road in Death Valley at night, 21-17. Again, I just don't trust that LSU offense whatsoever, and that's why I'm picking the Aggies. And I think Marcel Reed is able to run the football against this LSU defense. And then we go to Michigan at Michigan State, rivalry game here on NBC, 7:30 Eastern Time. Michigan is favored by 14.5. That's the highest spread that we've seen here so far throughout, these 10 games that I've had. Michigan is coming in, after a better performance against Washington. A couple weeks ago, they lost to USC. And you look at Michigan State on the other side, I don't really know a ton about Michigan State. I haven't really talked about them that much and, throughout the videos that I've done for the season. Probably only one time when they faced Boston College earlier in the year. All I know is they've lost 4 in a row. They have, they started 3-0 and they've lost 4 in a row. So I don't really trust Michigan State for that reason. But, Michigan has struggled on the road this year. Could this be one of those other games where they probably struggle on the road with a freshman quarterback in Bryce Underwood? I don't think so. I think Michigan is able to take care of business. They won't win by a blowout, but they'll definitely take care of business in this rivalry game. And I get it. Michigan State is a team that definitely is probably due for a win at some point, but it's just not going to be this game. I think Michigan wins it 27-13 for the Battle of the Bayou Trophy. And then finally, we have Houston at Arizona State in the Big 12. This one is on ESPN2 at 8 o'clock Eastern Time. Arizona State's favored by 7.5 in this one. You got Arizona State coming off a pretty impressive win against, Texas Tech. They pulled off a major upset there last week. But you look at Houston. This is not a bad football team. This is a pretty good Houston Cougars team. Willie Fritz has got this program heading in the right direction. They're 6-1. This is a pretty good opportunity for them to show us that they definitely could be a top 25 team and then also a contender in the Big 12. But Arizona State's playing at home. I think it's a pretty even matchup. I'm going to go with the Sun Devils. I do trust Sam Levin and Arizona State to get it done. And I'm going to go with a 38-35 score, even though the over-and-under is at like 40-something or maybe like 50-something. I can't remember what it was now. But either way, Arizona State wins it here. I'm going to go with a 38-35 shootout type score between these two teams. So those are all my game picks and predictions heading into Week 9 in this 2025 college football season. Give me your guys' picks and predictions for these 10 pinned games down in the comments below. Thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned for more sports content videos on the NCAA College Sports YouTube channel.